Good morning to those of you participating in the Migrating from Windows to Android on Handheld Devices webinar today. My name is Tim Royer, and I'm the product manager for the Archer and Allegro products here at Juniper Systems. I'm joined by Brad Thatcher, a content specialist in our marketing department. A few quick housekeeping items before we begin the webinar. First, we are going to go ahead and leave the microphones muted until the end of the presentation when we'll be taking questions. That will help make it easier for everyone to hear. Second, if you do have questions during the webinar, you can type those into the dashboard at any time using the questions tab that you should see on your screen, and we will answer those questions at the end. Third, when we turn on the microphones for questions, we ask that you state your name so we know who we have the privilege of addressing. And if I am unable to answer your questions, I will talk with our software engineers and get an answer back to you as soon as possible. And lastly, I wanted to mention that we will be emailing a link to today's webinar to all the registrants later this afternoon. I wanted to start with this slide because it applies to the discussion of migrating from Windows Embedded Handheld to Android. Those familiar with Juniper Systems know that our rugged data loggers and field computers have evolved over the past 38 years to incorporate changing technology and customer preference. More than our hardware and form factors have changed in that time. Our earliest handheld devices operated on proprietary operating systems before we migrated first to DOS, then Windows CE, followed by Windows Mobile, which Microsoft rebranded as Windows Embedded Handheld, and now migrating to Android. We feel that this most recent step follows that same pattern of incorporating changing technology and meeting customer needs. The objectives of today's webinar are first, to briefly review the Windows Mobile or Windows Embedded Handheld story, including the implications of Microsoft's decision to end support for this operating system in the very near future. Two, to walk through the different operating system alternatives. Three, to discuss the benefits of the Android operating system. And fourth, to point to resources and tools that are available for software developers who are either considering or have already decided on developing software for Android. The intended audience includes our customers who are unsure of what Microsoft's decision to end support for Windows Embedded Handheld means for them, and those interested in benefits of migrating to Android that are looking for software development direction. So starting with the Windows Mobile or Windows Embedded Handheld story, it initially contained vital components from other Windows operating systems, and it was designed for smaller devices, PDAs, small things like that, and it really optimized power management, having screens that were still manageable, navigable, so that you could have a portable device that you could collect data on or use for other applications. And there were many software applications that were available for Windows Mobile 6.5 and Windows Embedded Handheld. Microsoft has decided to end support for Windows Embedded Handheld on January 14th of this upcoming year in 2020. And what that means is that there would no longer be operating system updates or patches beyond January 14th. That could result in security vulnerabilities, problems with connectivity, or compatibility with newer technology. Perhaps some of you are already familiar with having difficulties in getting Windows Embedded Handheld to talk to your PC and have tried to find ways around that. Another thing that it means is that by April of 2022, manufacturers will not be able to ship any new products with Windows Mobile on them. And all small handheld devices need to migrate then to an alternate operating system, regardless of who manufactures the device. I apologize for the small font size and large amount of text on this slide. Don't feel that you need to read all of it right now. We have been tracking Windows Embedded Handheld limitations internally and with feedback from customers for the last couple of years. And this list is a sample of limitations that have come up. You'll notice in bold limitations with the web browser, with Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, Windows Mobile Device Center, cellular standards that have been outdated, software development, USB connectivity, display resolutions, email processors, and the list goes on from there. I think perhaps one that's important to point out is limitations on RAM, and that affects the processor, of course, as well as the storage memory. And for some of the needs that our users have, those can be limitations that hurt them. And so then what alternatives do people have if they're looking to develop on a new operating system? Just wanted to walk through what some of those alternatives are. The first wanted to talk about is other Windows mobile operating systems. Windows Embedded Handheld 8.1, the support ended for that this past June, and Microsoft appears to be completely transitioning then out of the mobile market. Looking at Windows 10 Pro or Windows Enterprise, there are screen size limitations. You could still get those operating systems to function on devices that have a screen size that is at least 7 inches in size. And so if you look on the picture on the right, we have 3 of our devices there, the Allegro, the Mesa, and the Archer. And the Mesa, the one in the middle, is the only one with a screen size large enough to work still with the Windows operating system. And so really, getting Windows 10 Pro or Enterprise is not a viable solution on these smaller devices. We looked into Windows 10 IoT, the Internet of Things, and found that it's a similar effort as moving to a non-Windows operating system, and it even had greater limitations in that not very many apps were being developed for that operating system. Of course, we've been asked a few times, well, why can't you just put on iOS? And the answer to that question is we would love to, but since we are not Apple, we are not able to put on an Apple operating system. And so that leads us to Android, which we consider to be a viable solution. And I wanted to take the rest of the time and just kind of talk about what that looks like, migrating then from Windows to Android for an operating system. Wanted to briefly show this graphic. This shows the percent of the mobile market, so that includes phones or small handheld devices, that Android occupies first globally. If you look there in the green line, Android occupies about 76% of the global market for handheld devices, for mobile devices, sorry. In the US and in North America, you see that Android and iOS are pretty even. And then in Europe, again, that looks a little bit closer to what you see globally. This is information that was pulled just this last month and showing that around the world, Android is looked at as being quite a popular and workable operating system for those mobile devices. So Android then, some might say that it's become the global default operating system for handheld devices. And initially, Android was designed for smaller screen devices, and now it has been expanded both directions. Watches, TVs, not listed here, wearable devices, and even automobiles now are incorporating Android operating systems. So I think it will just gain more and more in popularity, and we will see it being used in many different areas and with different kinds of products. With Android operating systems, a couple of things we wanted to talk about. First of all, the Android open source project. The AOSP is the basis for all Android devices. It's the foundation of an operating system. And it gives the source code, it makes that available, that is necessary to build any Android compatible operating system. And then also another thing to bring up is Google Mobile Services. We hear that often. Google Mobile Services, or GMS, is a set of licensed pre-installed packages of apps, Gmail, YouTube, Google Maps, things like that. And those apps are added only to select Android devices after making arrangements and agreements with Google. And that gives you then the availability also to the Google Play Store and other core but closed source apps. This table on this next slide just shows a brief comparison between AOSP and GMS. What does the name mean? We just went through that, Android open source project versus Google mobile services. AOSP is the foundation of all Android devices, and GMS again are those Google applications and the libraries that any application that is written for GMS would refer to in order to function properly. AOSP does not require a license. It's open. You can go and get it for free from the internet and start developing with it right away. If you were developing for GMS, you would need to have a contract with Google and recognize that there are going to be fees associated with going that route. The source code, again, with AOSP is available on the internet. For the source code from GMS, since it's a closed source code, you would have to contact Google, work out an agreement with them to have access to that. With AOSP, you are given the kernel, the frameworks, the information for the user interface. And GMS, again, you would have those applications that are most common, as well as services that any apps that you develop would have to refer to work. Often, an example we hear about is with mapping applications. If you were developing a spatial mapping software for GMS, it would go and look for those services, those libraries on GMS in order to function properly. Whereas with AOSP, you would be able to develop those yourself freely. What are some of the unique features that creates is that AOSP is much more customizable. For example, if you are looking at having a piece of hardware and operating software on it, and you want it only to perform a certain set of functions, you wouldn't have any unwanted app bundles if you went the ASP route. Whereas with GMS, you would have those apps that they include automatically, and that could be a good thing. It can also be a challenge in that it might consume processing power or memory that you would rather have devoted to running the software that you are looking to use for your tool. And then one last thing to point out with the app compatibility, if you were to develop an application that functions, if you developed it for AOSP, it would still be compatible with any GMS device as well. Whereas if you develop software to function with GMS, it would only be compatible on those GMS devices. Some of the questions we've been having here at Juniper Systems lately from our customers are, okay, well, if we know what the GMS applications are, perhaps we're familiar with them from a consumer device. Are there alternatives then that one could use for AOSP? And this just represents a very short list of some things that are comparable. For example, the Google Play Store, if you're used to going there to get your apps for your Android device, you can also find many of the same apps for an AOSP device at APK Pure or the Amazon App Store. If you're used to using Google Chrome to search the internet, you can use the Opera browser, the Firefox browser, on an AOSP device to still search the internet. There are alternatives for email. If you're used to using Gmail, you can use Microsoft Outlook or any web access Gmail or Bluemail. There are a few others as well. Again, we spoke briefly about Google Maps. Certainly a popular application that is available for GMS, and on AOSP you can use Waze, you can use Avenza, and there are many others that we have found to function on our AOSP devices. Perhaps less important for people out doing field work, but if you were looking for Google Music, Google Photos, Google Calendar, Google Contacts, there are other applications that are available for that. Amazon Music, Spotify, just a couple of quick examples there. And then, of course, if you're used to using YouTube, there are other alternatives such as Tube Video that you can use to still view videos that have been posted to the internet. One of the other questions we have had, well, a couple of tips here, is how do I get an app onto an AOSP device if it's not on APK Pure? Perhaps you have it or on another app store. If you have it, for example, on a desktop device and you want to transfer it to a handheld device or from one handheld device to another, you can do that using a process that many of us are familiar with in the days of using Windows Explorer, where you would just click and drag a file from one device to another. It's a similar process. using that direct loading. Some people now call that side loading. Here are the steps that you would go through. First, you would, on the handheld device, if it's an AOSP, if it has an AOSP operating system, you would first need to select to allow for third-party installations. Then you would browse to the file, either on the internet or on your other device that already has it. Click on the APK file, install it or accept it, and then your file would be loaded at that point. So it's not too difficult of an operation. The other tip we have found is that sometimes if you are looking for the current version of an app in the App Store and it is not downloading like you are wanting it to, there are drop-down menus usually that will allow you to select a previous version of the app, and you can see if that will load onto a device with an operating system, with an AOSP operating system. Some of the advantages we have found as we looked at AOSP and considered if that was the route that Juniper wanted to go with some of our handheld devices. The first one I think is perhaps one of the most important for us, is the flexibility of being able to develop software without having any of those restrictions that would be imposed by Google, while still being completely compatible with the full Android market. Again, the opportunity to say, well, I'm just looking for a field device or a device I can use in a warehouse that is going to perform a set function, and I don't need to have all of the other applications that Google would include. I don't need to get their approval on the licensing. And so it allows for a lot more freedom in developing a tool that most closely fits your needs and solves any problems you might be having, creates a better solution in our perspective. The other thing that we consider is the revenue potential is higher if you are using an AOSP operating system, because there is no overhead from selling on the Google Play Store. Our understanding is that if you have apps on Google Play Store, anytime somebody purchases that app, 30% of the revenue immediately goes to Google. And even if it's a subscription type application, Google still takes a percentage of that revenue from you. The operating system availability, certainly it's something we considered. Given the end of Windows, I think many people are still concerned about, well, how far into the future will an operating system be available? And from what we can see from our research, it looks like the Android system is considered future-proof. It will be here for a long time. Android's not going anywhere. And then the other advantage that we noticed is that people who develop for Android may be at a competitive advantage if their competitors are still using a Windows embedded handheld operating system, and knowing that that's going to be ending soon. The sooner you migrate to an Android operating system, maybe that makes it so that you are able to offer a solution before your competitors are able to do the same thing. So here at Juniper Systems, we have, again, several of our devices now are operating on Android operating systems. And we did what we could to make it so that it would still be a familiar transition for people. We have engineered certain features of AOSP rugged handheld devices to maximize their utility to customers and end users. For example, some of those additions, we've included a calculator, a calendar, a camera, clock, email files, the Opera search engine. Of course, you can still access your settings and sound recorders. You can do expansions. For example, if you wanted barcode scanners or things like that, that can all still work with your operating system. And Juniper made sure that that would be something that we could continue to offer. Also, our devices, they're expandable. You can customize usable expansion devices right out of the box. Again, just mentioned the barcode scanner as one example. If you're in a warehouse type setting or some other place where having that ability to scan barcodes, if that makes your life easier, is something that we have accounted for. We also, the software development kits, the SDKs, those are available for applications so that those can be accessed as well. Our touch screen is something that's still available. It has the same features as Windows with custom profiles and recalibration. For example, many of our handheld devices, you can go in and change the profile if you were working with gloves or if you were working in a rainy environment, so that the screen detects your finger or the stylus more than the raindrops splashing on the screen. The keypads, of course, can be customized, some of them on the keypad, so that if you had a frequently needed action that you're performing, maybe you're taking a picture, or maybe you're changing the zoom profile or something of that sort, the programmable keys would allow you to do that with one keystroke instead of several keystrokes. And then, of course, we feel that our Android devices are the most rugged handheld devices that are operating on an Android operating system. This next slide just offers some additional information, pointing to where you could go to find more information about migrating to AOSP or to Android. Those first two bullet points there take you to some blog posts that were previously written here at Juniper, and explain a little bit more about what the different options are, what GMS means, what AOSP is, what app alternatives are available. And next here, talking about developing for AOSP on devices like our Mesa or our Archer or Allegro. A couple of these links would take you to pages that start explaining how to develop an app or how to start writing an app for AOSP. Some of them share sample codes and applications so that you can look and see how it's been done other places, and even sometimes incorporate those application or those codes into your own application. There's also a link there for a little more instruction on how to side load or direct load applications onto a Juniper system device. And then finally down here, the last set of links, those are ones for Android Studio and Developer, where you can go to get information and even a stepwise process of how to begin developing apps for an Android operating system. Excuse me. On this next slide, just wanted to show a quick screenshot, excuse me, of what it looks like on Android Studio. If you go to their workflow basics, here are the stepwise instructions for writing an app. Of course, this is simplified, there's more to it, but you can see that if you go to this web page, there is information behind each of these stepwise instructions to clearly describe what you would need to do. So for example, first, you would set up your workspace. That would include getting your environment prepared, creating a project. Then you would write your app, write the code, put in any assets that you would want to have included. Then you build and run your app, connect it to a device, customize your build, and then you do an iterative process of debugging and testing to make sure that it's doing what you want it to do before finally publishing your new app. Again, there is the link to get to Android Studio. If you have more questions, you can go there and see the steps for going through and not only developing your app, but also find help from others perhaps who have been through similar situations and have left comments there. You can also find additional information from the Juniper System blogs, where we published some helpful resources for developing for AOSP. I wanted to point out as well, again, the Archer 3, the Allegro 3, and the Mesa 2, and soon to be released Mesa 3 products are all devices that Juniper has migrated to already with an Android operating system. They are not GMS devices. They are operating on AOSP. Again, we feel that that was a better customizable option for our customers and end users. And with that, we're going to go ahead and open up for questions. Again, there is my contact information. If you have a question that comes to your mind later, you can always send me an email or give us a call, and I will do my best to get you an answer. Let me go ahead and activate the mics, so if people have questions, they can let us know. If I can figure out how to do that. We're trying. It looks like there's a little bit of a difficulty in getting the mics to come on. Okay, the message is that you are now able to control for yourselves whether or not you want to unmute. So you would need to click on your microphone for yourself to unmute if you have a question. I'm sorry, I thought we could do it all with just one simple click of the button here. Wanted to quickly clarify while we're waiting to see if there were questions, that the Mesa 3 that is soon to be released, there will actually be a couple of different versions. One will be a Windows. Since it does have that larger screen, it can still operate on a Windows operating system. And there will also be an AOSP option, like we've been discussing, and it will also be developed for GMS. So if you did have software you were developing for Android GMS, it would work on the Mesa 3, but not the smaller handheld.
Yeah, hi, this is Pralhad. Quick question. Are you sending out the presentation to all the attendees?
Yes, the presentation will be emailed to all the registrants today.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay, again, my contact information is on the last slide. So
Hello?
if you have it. Hello?
Oh, I had a question. Yeah, this is James Cornthwaite from Juniper Systems. I was just wondering if maybe you have a reference application that you've written for, say, the Allegro 3 that just demonstrates how to control access to keys or external devices, something like that.
We do, James, and I can get that to you. We've got your email from the list of registrants, so if you don't mind, I could just send you an email with that.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, if no other questions, we'll go ahead and end the webinar. Thank you for participating. Contact information is on the last slide. If you do have questions come up in the next couple of days as you're considering migrating from Windows to Android. Thank you for your time.
Thanks very much.
Mm-hmm.